There's two really, I would say, the two most important illusions that you remark in your book, Losing Ourselves. And those are that we are immediately aware of the full contents of our minds in one side, and the other one, the subject and object duality with which we can get into selflessness. How are those two illusions the sources of suffering?
Oh, that's a very good question. The illusion that I'm immediately and infallibly aware of the contents of my own mind generates suffering in two really important respects. The first is that it's almost always wrong. We don't have infallible immediate access to our minds. We have only a kind of introspective access to our minds, and we are subject to all kinds of introspective distortions and illusions. And that results in psychopathology because we fail to know the roots of our own ideas, attitudes, and conduct. And so when we're engaged, for instance, in conduct that causes us or others to suffer, we become unaware of that or even take that to be positive. And that we find is the root of a lot of interpersonal difficulties. But it also means that when we fail to notice character traits that we might otherwise wish to deal with. So we might not notice that we're racist, sexist, impatient, and so forth, and so fail to become more patient or less racist or less sexist. The other source of suffering there in that illusion is that it comes with the illusion that we know ourselves better than we know others. And so for that reason, we also block ourselves from taking seriously the empathic understanding of others because we fail to recognize that we can often perceive and be aware of others' affect, emotional states and thoughts, just as we are of our own. And it leads us to a kind of closure to the feelings of others. Now, the second illusion that you just mentioned is the illusion of subject-object duality. And that's a more complex and subtler delusion because the way that it really manifests is in our thinking of ourselves as kind of transcendental spectators who stand outside the world and experience it and act on it, rather than as beings embedded in the world. When we do that, we grant to ourselves a special status, a special metaphysical status, a special epistemic status, and in the end, a special moral status that we don't grant to anybody else. And that leads us to take ourselves, our own interests, our own perspectives far more seriously than we take the interests and perspectives of others. And so that leads us to act in fundamentally egoistic ways and to overvalue our own judgments and to, again, be closed to the judgments of others. And so for that reason as well, it's a source of suffering, because then we fail to note that rather than being one human subject among several billion, each of whom has got a legitimate perspective on the world and legitimate interests, I think of myself as the source of subjectivity and everybody else as a mere object. And so I ignore another 6 billion perspectives in favor of my own, which is A, stupid, and B, immoral.
So the illusion of selfhood, of having a self, of having something that's not subject to the cause and effect of the world is morally dysfunctional in the sense that you said that we cannot put everything into a leveled field in which we judge everything with an equanimity, while we perceive our thoughts to be originating from a locus of control that's ruling over what you are supposed to be doing. But that's quite an intangible concept, I think, for the average person to grasp. What is it that we intuitively feel to be the self, which is just the other side of the same coin of free will?
Yeah, you're right that this is a difficult thing for people to grasp. And I, in part, wrote this book in the hope that it would help people get some grip on it, because I think that it's a very, very subtle illusion. It's also completely pervasive. We superimpose this subject-object duality and this sense of ourselves as standing apart from the world on almost all of our experience. And so we don't even notice when we're doing it. And it really requires a sustained kind of attention to become aware of it. Now, you are right that it's very much bound up with the illusion that we might call the free will illusion. The illusion that as agents. We operate with what I call an Augustinian free will, because I think it really is St. Augustine who introduces this idea and articulates it with the most clarity in the Western tradition. And it's to him that we really owe this kind of theorization.
So that Adam and Eve were responsible.
Yeah. It's not just him, but he's the clearest image of this. So when we talk about that, this is the illusion that when I act, I do so in a way that exempts me from the causal nexus, that my own actions are brought about by what gets called these days agent causation, not causation from outside of me. Now, that's a crazy viewpoint on only a little bit of reflection. And it's not even something that a rational person would desire if we reflect on it. So let's get clear about that. This is the idea that when I do something like raise my hand or decide to purchase a particular car, that I do so completely freely, uncaused by anything else. But would I want that? No. What I want for agency is that when I raise my hand, that raising of my hand is caused by my intention to raise it. I would want my purchase of the car to be caused by my desire for that particular car. And I want those desires to be caused as well. I don't want them to spontaneously and randomly arise in me. I want them to be caused by my standing beliefs, by my values, by my goals in life. I don't want those to be random either. I want those to be caused in the right way. So what we really want is not to be behaving like rolls of the dice. We want our behavior to be caused, but to be caused in ways that we actually reflectively endorse. And that requires not exemption from the causal order, but embedding in the causal order. So the illusion of the self is also the illusion of something, as I said, that stands transcendentally outside of the world and so is exempt from causation. And that gives us a distorted sense of our own agency. Notice that it also, when we impute a self to others, and so impute them as standing outside of the causal agency, regard them as standing outside of the causal agency, we also regard them as operating with a kind of Augustinian free will. And that leads us to an exaggerated tendency to hold people morally responsible for things for which they may not be responsible. And so to focus on punishment or anger as a response to perceived slights or to dysfunctional behavior, rather than an attitude of care and a concern to remediate. So this is a problem not only for us that might lead us to excessive pride in what we did, right? The kind of slogan, "You didn't build that," is really important for this, right? To recognize that we don't even build ourselves. If I manage to accomplish anything, that's a consequence of what my parents, my teachers, my friends, my co-citizens, my colleagues, the rest of the natural world have made it possible for me to do, so that an appropriate response to, say, something I perceive as an accomplishment should be gratitude and not pride. Similarly, an appropriate response to something that somebody else does that I might feel negative towards should not be an attitude of anger or a need for revenge, but rather perhaps an attitude of concern or care that they've been caught up in a causal nexus that's led them to behave as they do. And I think that if we adopted moral reactive attitudes that reflected our interdependence, our own and that of others, in a complicated causal nexus in which we all figure, and in which all of our compatriots, all of our co-citizens, all of our fellow inhabitants of the planet also participate, that would lead us to healthier, more productive moral attitudes, rather than attitudes of pride, anger, impatience, desire for revenge, arrogance, and so forth.